Hello, my dear friends. It's me, Verge, on the day of the full moon in Sagittarius. What is today, June 13th? Although I probably won't post this for at least a couple days, so happy full moon belated to you. Today I'm actually going to post another full moon video that I filmed last month from the full moon in Scorpio, full moon eclipse. So recently a dear friend of mine, Vicky, reminded me about the book The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, and I listened to it again for the first time in quite a long time, or maybe I had never listened to it in full, but I encourage you to listen to it in full on YouTube. It's only about an hour and 15 minutes long. I'll link to it down below. So the four agreements are: be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and always do your best. And when I listened to that, I felt like, okay, I'm pretty obsessed, right, with being impeccable with my word. And even though I'm certainly not perfect at it, I'm really trying hard and doing pretty well at that one. Don't take things personally. Pretty darn conscious of that and doing, fairly well. I'm at least on the road to getting there, to recovery from taking things personally. Now, when it comes to not making assumptions, not doing so well. This is not as comfortable as I want it to be. I'm trying to rest on the ground. Also, can you see this little design I made while I was on the phone with my friend Susie? Anyway, so I felt like what I most needed to listen to was don't make assumptions. And I would just like to invite you guys to be out there practicing that with me, because I have found that when I become conscious and catch myself in making usually an unkind assumption, that when I open to that and let go of thinking that I know and making that unkind assumption, very quickly in time in the temporal world after that, I'm shown that I was completely wrong in the not very generous assumption that I was making. However, I feel like if we don't open to remembering to practice not making assumptions, then we might never be willing to be shown. Like the world, our angels, the cosmos, our higher selves, our hearts might be trying to show us like, no, your assumption was wrong. But if we're not willing to remember to try not to make assumptions, we might never see that. So another thing I just want to say is my friend DJ had a good point, which was it's really hard to really not let your mind make any assumptions. So because it wants to fill the space of not knowing with something. So his idea was, and I like this too, just try and think of as many possibilities as possible. And of course, try and be more generous with your assumptions. So sure, you come up with that first one where you're like, well, I'm sure they're doing it because of this. And okay, you came up with an assumption, you become conscious, like, oh, I don't want to make assumptions. And so then maybe come up with 10 more assumptions of other things that it could be and try and make them as generous as possible if you can. And I feel like therein lies the work, is like just by admitting that you don't actually know and letting go of the assumption that you're trying to make, I think that is really where the magic happens. And so if you have at least more assumptions that you're making or possibilities, again, guesses, because the thing about an assumption is that you think you're right. And that is where I feel like we really get in trouble. So instead of, berating yourself if you are making an assumption or trying not to let your mind go anywhere, just acknowledge, oh, I made an assumption. Now I'm going to come up with 10 other possibilities that it could be, and I'm going to try and consciously, just for fun, see if I can make those more generous. Sorry, I had a phone call. It's actually my cousin. I'm going to be calling her back. And I wanted to share with you a story, a really special story about me making an assumption that ended up, and it ties in with some other things as far as being courageous and authentic as well. So I have a dear new friend. Her name, I will not share in this video because I want to let it be anonymous. However, she has a beautiful name and is truly one of the most beautiful women just I have ever met, inside and out. And I feel just, I'm tearing up right now, just humbled to know her. And, you know, she and I had connected, for sure. She's someone who comes out to the barn a lot, but this actually led us to connecting on a way deeper level. Me making an assumption. So also, when you make an assumption, it could lead to the alchemization of something even better. So don't be scared to go on that journey of learning not to make them, and know that the mistakes along the way will help you grow. So one night I came out to the barn and my 2 dogs were with me, and they had been inside because Rosalind's paw had been hurt. She's doing a lot better now. She got, if any of you know what foxtails are, they get stuck in dog's fur, and she had an abscess in her left front paw. It was terrible. Anyway, so the dogs had been cooped up in the house all day, which is abnormal, and they were like ready to run. And so we came down, it was the evening time, and there weren't very many people around, but they just came out of the bushes and came ripping down the alleyway and spooked several horses. And I, you know, have my insecurities about my dogs. They're really pretty much the coolest dogs in the world, in my opinion. And our relationship always continues to grow in so many ways. But I would say I also project my own insecurities about myself onto them sometimes, especially being in a place like this with 70 horses around and lots of people and lots of dogs, about them being too much and, you know, too energetic or too sporadic, or when they do jump out of the bushes or trees from having hunted lizards or squirrels. And so in this moment, I saw this new friend like be very kind of taken aback and kind of like close in this moment when my dogs ran by. And I literally turned it into this whole story in my mind about how she was mad at me because my dogs were too much, and she was, you know, just incredulous that I would let my dogs run around like that, and that she thought I was a bad person because my dogs are too much and running around and spooking horses, and had this whole narrative, like, and was so, you know, used it unconsciously or as an excuse really to just channel a lot of anger and insecurity about myself. But I was assuming that this person was mad at me, and that was what had happened. That was why she had closed, that was why I felt her energy shift, was because she was mad about my dogs. Well, the next day or 2 days later, she and I saw each other, and we ended up getting into a conversation and just delving into this like deep, therapeutic, amazing conversation, and becoming, you know, 1,000 times closer than we had ever been. And finally, during that, because we were talking so much about therapy, about transparency, about authenticity, about courage, and I was like, okay, well, and she's a very sensitive soul, so I knew that she had felt me close to her that night. And so in the sake of wanting our friendship to go forward from a place of trust, I wanted to really tell her what had happened instead of pretending like it didn't happen, because, you know, no words ever passed between us. It was only energetic. But the more I got to know her, the more I was like, oh man, she for sure felt that. So I was like, hey, I just want to tell you what happened the other night. Like, I have all these insecurities about my dogs being too much, just like I have these insecurities about myself being too much. I thought you got mad at me, blah, blah, blah. And she was just like, no. Like, it turned out that she had been having this very intense moment that was almost out of body of processing, and was just in a very, you know, tough place in that moment. And my dogs had just kind of like jolted her back, like just in the fact that she was almost like not fully there. And it was, you know, this thing where suddenly all these horses were spooking and these dogs were running. And then she had been afraid that I was mad at her for not responding quickly enough, because in that moment I said sorry. Like, I was like, sorry. And it took her, you know, a few moments to say, oh, it's okay. But the way she said it's okay felt very, you know, disconnected, I guess, which again, I assumed was because she was angry at me. And it later turned out it was because she was having her own struggles that had virtually nothing to do with me or my dogs. And that was really hard for me to bring up to her too, because I was super embarrassed. Like I knew, I kind of like had already gleaned at that point that she had never been mad at me about my dogs, but I was like, I feel like I want this person to know that they can trust me, and that means sharing this kind of embarrassing assumption and truth. They don't like to be filmed. So that assumption, had I not gone into it and questioned it and then actually been willing to share it transparently, because that's a good way to find out if our assumptions are right or wrong, just directly ask. And you don't have to ask if your assumption was right. You can just ask what's going on if you're in a safe place to be able to do so in the situation. But yeah, and I had another experience like that today where I was making this assumption that someone wasn't helping me do something and was just off doing I don't know what. And so I like went to get a snack, and then I came back and it turned out that they had helped me like 5 times more than I had even thought, and I just hadn't even seen. Yeah. So essentially, every time I make a bad assumption, if I'm willing to open up and just remember, don't make assumptions, and that kind of stops that brain circuit of like, no, I know the answer, and it's this, and it's the worst thing it could possibly be, and I'm a self-righteous victim, and blah, blah, blah. As soon as I am just somehow willing to get out of that, whether just by saying, oh, like, well, that's just an assumption, I don't know if that's true, or making, putting out other possibilities or whatever, it's like so quickly, I feel like the universe complies and is like, here's what was going on. And it's always like, oh, it was nothing close to what I thought it was. And it was actually way more gracious and way better. And it was, this beautiful chance to realize how great humanity is instead of how awful. So I encourage you to read or listen to the book, The 4 Assumptions. Wow. There's an unconscious slip. Well, if you're going to make any assumptions, at least come up with 4 options. I encourage you to read the book, The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And I encourage you to just try and catch yourself when you're making assumptions, and to open up, at the very least, to realizing that maybe it's not what you think it is, coming up with other possibilities, relaxing into the feeling of not knowing, and seeing if it doesn't happen to you as it does to me, where the universe provides all these opportunities to show you like, no, it totally wasn't what you thought. Look, it was so much better. All right, signing out. It's my day off tomorrow, so I'm excited about that, and I hope that you guys, by the time you see this, the full moon will have passed, so I hope it's gone really well for you, and I will talk to you soon. Also, isn't this shirt so cute? It's very Little House on the Prairie. A friend here gave this to me. Isn't that so sweet? She just gave it to me because she felt like it didn't fit her right. And I'm like, this could not possibly be more my style. All right. Love you. Talk to you soon.